Don't be worried or anxious. I mean, look at the birds. These are Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 6. And many Christians don't recognize the deeper point Jesus is making here about anxiety. See, for a while, I thought I understood what Jesus meant here, until I dug a little deeper. And then it finally hit me. He just said you can't serve God and money. And I'll show you why this is important. In this video, we're going to walk through this passage together. And we're going to look at 5 key observations that often get overlooked by people. This will be a fun study. So let's jump in. Starting in verse 25 of Matthew 6, we're going to walk through each of these 5 key points and make sense of what Jesus is really saying here. And at the end, we'll have our answer to why Jesus uses the birds to address anxiety. I recommend you watch the previous Matthew teaching, as well as the rest of this Matthew series, by clicking the links in the description of this video. Starting in verse 25, therefore, because you can't serve God and money, here's the wisdom. Here's the conclusion we can come to. I tell you, do not be anxious about your life. So this becomes almost the reason. Don't be anxious about your life. Why? Because you can't serve God and money. And people miss that. What you will eat, what you will drink. Notice how eating, drinking, nor about your body, what you will put on. Eating, drinking, and clothing. That seems to be what life is reduced down to for a lot of people. And by the way, this is a clear command, not a suggestion. So on a very basic level, this is a choice that we make, or at least this is the result of a series of choices that we make. This choice to not be anxious, or in Philippians 4, like Paul says, rejoice in the Lord. So when Jesus says, therefore I tell you, it's another way of asserting his divine authority, as we saw in chapter 5 when he said, you've heard it said, but I say. Now Jesus is confronting not what these people have been taught or what they've heard, but he's addressing what they feel in their hearts. So number 1, this is exactly what God addresses in Deuteronomy chapter 8 with the people of Israel. And rightfully so. Israel is worried and concerned about things that for us, we can't put ourselves in their shoes. But in Deuteronomy 8, God is constantly addressing the worries that Israel has about their physical needs and being constantly in the wilderness. And the reason I bring that in is it's important to read the New Testament in light of the Old. We're going to see a lot of concern on the part of Israel throughout their history, specifically when they first come out of Egypt, and they're kind of, in their infant stage as a nation. They're very vulnerable. And Jesus will explain, is not life more than food, and the body more than clothing? What's interesting is he never addresses the drinking portion, the need to be hydrated, just the food and the clothing, the bare necessities. So this is another reference to the body, as we saw in verse 22, right? What one thinks about their body is likely a reflection of their value system and their greatest treasures in this life. Because remember earlier, he said if your whole body's full of light or darkness, depending on what you treasure, that's going to determine how you live. And this is the second thing we need to pay attention to. This is all about living under God's open heaven, here on the earth. It's more than just having our physical needs met. It's about seeing the character of God in the midst of him caring for us and meeting our needs. So life goes beyond just filling temporary needs. The purpose of life right here, when he says, isn't life more than food and the body more than clothing? What happens is people reduce life down to nothing more than their physical needs. Like, I exist to just feed myself and clothe myself and meet those basic needs. The purpose of life cannot and should not be reduced down to just physical needs. Just as the purpose of the body can't be reduced down to just the need for clothing. So the concern for the body here, at least to the covering, makes me think of Genesis chapter 3, because when he says, isn't life more than food and the body more than clothing, he's talking about what you will put on. And this will be very important for the next video on the flowers and Solomon, what we will wear. But at least consider this with me. In Genesis chapter 3, Adam and Eve feel a sense of shame and fear, and they hear God coming, and they cover themselves in fig leaves. They sew for themselves loincloths out of fig leaves. So their own covering is out of a sense of fear and insecurity and shame. And we're going to see that contrasted with God clothing them at the end of Genesis chapter 3. So there are apparently more important things to think about and dedicate yourself to than these things that God will later say, I'll take care of if you just seek first my kingdom. Now we get to the point where Jesus says, hey, look at the birds. And you're like, of all the things, like Jesus, was this just the first thing you saw and you went, that's an illustration? Or did you have this planned out? What's going on? Look at the birds of the air. I think this is going to be the best example in creation that Jesus possibly could have used to deal with anxiety and make a point about God's fatherly heart. Look at the birds of the air. They neither sow nor reap nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not of more value than they? And so this is another command, not a suggestion. Look at the birds. The audience is not just supposed to observe in their mind, but look around. Look at them. The first command was don't be anxious. The second one is look at the birds. So this could possibly be a very practical kind of system we use in the midst of anxiety and worry. Pause, don't be anxious. Look at creation and observe God's fatherly heart in his world that he cares for. Hey, if you don't know me, my name is Jason, and you can find everything about this ministry on abovereproachministry.com. All of our Bible resources, our online church, ways to support this ministry, and so much more. And if you live anywhere near Spartanburg, South Carolina, come check out our church on Sundays at 10 a.m. Also, I have 2 brief updates for those of you that are part of this community. Number 1, the revision of my book Fruitful is coming out soon, hopefully in the next few weeks. So be sure to grab a copy of that when it does release. And number 2, we now have options on our website for monthly support. And when you become part of our monthly support team, you get access to all of our exclusive teachings and videos that get released every week. This is just my way of saying thank you. All right, that's all I got for you. Let's get back to the video. And then Jesus makes a point. He says, look at the birds of the air. And if you stop there, you're like, okay, I'm looking. He's no. Look at what they don't do. They neither sow or plant seeds in their fields, right? They don't have fields. They don't reap or harvest, nor do they gather into barns and store things up for the years. And yet, this is the key word, yet, despite what they can't and don't do, your heavenly Father feeds them. When you restrict God's provision down to your own ability and your own resources and what your own knowledge and connections and frankly what you can bring to the table, you're going to miss out on what God really wants to do in your life, because God will exceed your expectations and what you have in your hands, and his provision in our life is not limited to what we have in our hands. Look at the multiplication of the bread and the fish throughout the Gospels. So birds have no established system of planting and reaping and storing, and yet they get what God gives them for that day. They have no plan for preparing for future needs. They're fed today. They have no system to trust in like we do. We're tempted to find security in systems, but Jesus is stripping that from us. Yet your heavenly Father feeds them. God feeds them from where? From heaven. Your Father in heaven. We saw this throughout Matthew 5 and 6. Just as the emphasis has been on in the last chapters, God's mercy and love and grace and provision pour down from heaven. So here's the third observation. Jesus wants the people to observe and notice what the birds do not do, and yet God does. Despite what the birds can't do, God still does. And this will connect later to the rich young ruler, where Jesus will say to the disciples, what's impossible for man is possible with God. And then Jesus makes a switch, or he seems to topically change and transition, but he's not. Are you not of more value than they? So not only is the point of bringing up the birds to say, look at what they don't do and God still cares for them, but look at what God does for them and you're more valuable to him than birds. So we've seen this comparison already. The body is more than clothing. Life is more than food. And now you're more valuable than the birds. So number 4, this is the observation we need to really, really pay attention to. I want us to absorb this and think about it. It's as though Jesus is speaking to the doubt in people, the doubt in God's provision, the doubt in God's love for them and care for them and value for them. Kind of like Adam and Eve were tempted to believe when the serpent came into the garden and said, did God really say he's holding out on you? And so they were presented this kind of negative picture of God. We doubt our value in God's sight. We doubt our value to God. We doubt how he sees us, and we end up having a bad eye towards the world and how we see people in situations, and our vision and our worldview ends up being a reflection of our view of God. How we treat people and how we think about ourselves and the world around us ends up being a reflection of what we think about God's view of us. That's why Jesus pauses to say, let's address the fact you are more valuable to God than the birds that he's taking care of very well. And we'll end here. Then we'll have our answer, our one sentence answer. And which of you, let's just paint the scenario. Let's have a kind of thought experiment. Which of you, by being anxious, can add a single hour to his span or length of life, which assumes an allotted duration of life on the earth from God? See, what anxiety does is it doesn't add any hours to your life. It actually robs you of life by interrupting the present moment. Anxiety is always future-oriented. It's all about what will be: groceries, bills, needs, health, safety, my children, what will be. Here's the fifth point that we cannot miss. Your life is in his hands, not your own. You cannot lengthen your own life. We cannot prolong our lives past the boundaries God has marked out for us in this life, the same way birds cannot guarantee there will be food for them when they go out hunting. God is the one who provides and feeds for them, of course, through their efforts, right? But their efforts could amount to nothing. And that's the humbling truth in this passage for us. Your efforts can amount to nothing. You can fail. But when God is in the equation and he allows your efforts to produce, God will guarantee that you get what you need. So we want his favor on our labor. We don't want to labor without that. So God is going to, I guess technically, I said we'd look at 5 observations. This is kind of the continuation of the 5th. God guarantees to Israel over and over throughout the Old Testament by his word that manna will be on the ground every day. And they get to trust him while they're in the wilderness until they walk into the promised land and get to enjoy from the land. This is what we're invited into, is to pray, God, give us this day our daily bread, and then believe that when I go out, when I labor, when I work, when I do the will of God and seek first his kingdom, I'm going to find what I need out there from the hand of God. Like James says, all good things come from the Father of lights. So what's interesting is Jesus addresses the value, what birds don't do, and how anxiety literally detracts from your life. See, worrying puts you in the driver's seat and makes you assume more control than you have. Again, anxiety detracts and wastes the God-given breath that you have. But what's interesting is there is a story, and there's probably other ones I can't think of right now, a story where Hezekiah, he's one of the kings, I believe of Judah, could be wrong, but he's an example of someone who prayed. Isaiah told him, you're going to die, get your house in order. He prayed, and God added to his life. God lengthened his life in response to his prayer. And so instead of being anxious and thinking, this will make my life, it does nothing good for you. Just like Philippians 4 says, in all things, by prayer and supplication, let your requests be made known to God. Don't be anxious. With your anxieties, bring those to God. So the question becomes, why does Jesus point to birds to address anxiety? Because birds are one of the most available examples in creation of God's care and provision as described in Matthew chapter 5, that God's rain and sunshine comes on the good and the evil. Birds remind us of the love and care of the Father, how valuable we are to him, and how all of our efforts only produce if he says so. So lest we trust in systems and knowledge and technology and ability and connections, we should trust only in the hand of God. And so in the next video, Jesus will bring up the lilies of the field, and he'll make this very odd reference to Israel's wisest and richest king, King Solomon. I'll explain why when we dive deeper into this section, the next section in the next Bible study. So be sure to watch that, because these two sections right here are deeply connected and they come in a package. So make sure you go ahead and watch that. Hey, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more biblical content just like this. We have hundreds of videos, but you might be most interested in these ones right here. Also, visit our website for all of our free resources and classes. And thank you so much for partnering with us financially to make this ministry even possible. Keep moving towards Jesus, and I'll see you in the next video.